I would give him a B, certainly, not an A. A for good intentions, but perhaps unreachable intentions in the realities that existed. Look, let's look soberly at the situation he inherited. A rotten system, still corrupt, a legal system that remains corrupt, and hence, even despite the declarations that have been made, it's proven difficult to bring the big fish um, behind bars, to put them behind bars, let alone bring them to trial, even though he said he would. Yes, a lot of moves have been made against the smaller fish, the smaller fry, and that is encouraging. It appears that preparations are being made for big moves early in the new year, including some of the top leaders. And we've seen signs of that. But I think it's proven very difficult to get things moving because not simply the inertia, but the old corrupt practices that exist. Don't forget that there's been a very strong response and reaction, not only from his political opponents in the Poroshenko camp, which depict him as a traitor, enemy, and etc., but also that the oligarchs have retrenched. Kolomoisky is leading his crusade and charge, mainly around the Privat Bank issue, but also showing his disdain for Zelensky, for the fact that Zelensky has not sort of aligned himself with Kolomoisky as was expected and has distanced himself. And Kolomoisky has made these outrageous statements ever since that, what's happening in the East is an internal conflict, despite his actions in 2014 when he helped to save eastern Ukraine from further Russian incursions, and his statements that we shouldn't really try to win the favor and support of the IMF. We should go the Greek way, devalue the currency, default, etc., etc. I mean, these are shocking statements to be made, and I'll get my bank back, etc., etc. He's not helped Zelensky in any way. But quietly, Akhmetov, Firtash, and others, they've been doing what they could to retrench and salvage, let's say, engage in damage control. Zelensky and his people have said that we want to demonopolize, deregulate, etc. And I call on the oligarchs to show understanding, to help in building the country with their funding, etc. But gently to move out of politics, the media. He's made that one of the key areas. Get on with business, but in more reasonable, shall we say, levels. Otherwise, I will encourage them to reduce their presence. So this means things like, do you buy energy? Do you buy coal from Russia? Do you buy electricity from Russia? It's easy for Kolomoisky to do so for his things, or for Akhmetov to keep doing so, even if you circumvent the system. But if you have a president saying, no, that's got to stop, you begin opposing him. And these various scandals that we've seen at various levels, both within Zelensky's own party, but also the leaking of tapes from within, law enforcement agencies, etc. This could not happen without very strong political and financial support from oligarchs, political players. You can guess who, but also the SBU and people who are maybe still in the security forces or may have been kicked out in recent months and have an axe to grind, etc. So you've seen all this coming to a head in the last, say a month or so ago, and suddenly the ratings then dropped, of course, plummeted by some, 12, 20% or whatnot, but still high considering what's happening in the country. The president's and parliament's ratings are still high. So yes, they've fallen by 12% dramatically in November. But is that dramatic if they're still very high? Perhaps they were unreasonably high because expectations were unreasonable. Maybe they're just balancing out now. So even now, look at the situation on the eve of the Normandy summit. 70% of the population or more of those polled. And let's give credit to the pollsters here. A lot of people that were anti Zelensky used to dismiss the polls. Remember, at the beginning of the year, oh, what are the polls? These are false. They're bought. They were very accurate in terms of what the actual final results were. And I think Ukrainian pollsters now are some of the best in Europe. They've become very professional. They've engaged a lot of foreign expertise, and we can really gauge the mood more of society from anything from let's say privatizing agricultural land and selling it to, I don't know, tariffs, hikes on utilities, whatever. In the old days, this was all speculated about, and you know, the food for populism. Now you get almost every month fairly reliable polls that show you what the mood and thinking is. And it's interesting that in August, for example, or so, when Zelensky had and the parliament had just come into their own, or were coming into their own, that the primary concern was peace. 70-something% of the population, of those polled, said, we want a ceasefire. For us, that's number one. And then 40% or so were talking about improvement of economic conditions and whatnot. What's interesting is that 2 months later, when asked what is the biggest threat to Ukraine, I noticed, what do you think they said? The war, Russian invasion? They said the outflow, the mass hemorrhaging of population from Ukraine, that we as a nation are shrinking. We're losing not just the best minds, but the best skilled workers. And where are we going? And what do you see Zelensky doing in the last week or so? To offering new incentives for people to come back, short-term and longer-term loans at very competitive for Ukraine rates. 5%, 7%, 12%, you know, when the usual rates here are in the 20s, high 20s, sometimes in the 30s. That at least is something that is a responsiveness to the current concerns. And suddenly these big gripes about utility bills, gas, electricity, whatever, that, you know, Lyashko and Tymoshenko played upon, etc., they're there, but they're certainly not as strong, and they cannot be manipulated as much as they were before, which is also positive, because it means that you know, the level of sophistication in approaching these issues is growing, and it's not as easy anymore for parliamentarians and politicians to manipulate these slogans, as it were. Which is not to say that we don't have immense problems. I think the media is still very lacking in its professionalism. We have certainly pluralism, but we don't have the quality of reporting and, shall we say, objective, detached journalism. We still have this engaged, emotional editorializing, depending on who's paying or whose channel you work for, or whose newspaper. And we've just seen one of the leading, most respected newspaper, say for the intelligentsia here in Kyiv, with both the Russian and Ukrainian edition, Zerkalo Nedelya, is folding. It will still have another track one. What kind of country is this where we don't, apart from Den, which is largely read in Kyiv, try finding Den in Odessa or Dnipro, I couldn't, you know. We don't even have a single mass Ukrainian newspaper daily. And so the impact on the population, of course, is not the kind that raises the level of political awareness and political culture. It still, you know, breeds confusion and stereotypes, etc., etc.